Today we're going to talk about two keywords or clauses. We're going to talk about where and limit. They're both in some ways filters or keywords that restrict the number of rows you get in your result. So let's start with limit. Actually, I'm going to put both of the definition here. So limit restricts how many rows the SQL query returns. What does that mean? That means if your query has a resulting table of, let's say, 150 rows, you can add the keyword limit with a number, like for example, limit 20, and you will only get 20 rows. So let's look at an example. So here we have a query where we are selecting date and also open, the open price. We'll run that. As you can see, we now have the day and the prices. Actually, let's name it date since it's more accurate. All right, let's run that again. So now we have the historical stock prices of Apple. And let's try our new keyword. Let's limit to maybe 10 rows. We're going to click Format SQL because we want to format it into a nice way, but it really doesn't matter because we could still run it. And then as you can see, we only get 10 rows. I can't scroll down, I can't scroll up. And then maybe if I do 20 instead and I run it, we are going to get 20 rows this time. As you can see, once I scroll up and down, we get from row 1 to row 20. So what happens when you don't put a limit? In Mode Editor, you usually have like a 100 limit that's set already. So as you can see here, where I wrote this query down without a limit, this editor actually automatically limits my results to 100, right? So as you can see, only 100 rows have been returned. And the reason for that is because querying a database is expensive, especially if you have millions and millions of rows. Especially if you work at a big tech company, they have an enormous amount of data. Sometimes you want to just get a few rows to get an idea of what values are in the table, right? Even if I click flight revenue, for example, right here, I click flight revenue, I know that these are the fields, but I'm not sure how the fields look like, right? Because I'm not sure if the data is clean. So let's query this table. Star meaning we're getting all the columns, double click, and then I run. So only with 100 rows would probably suffice. I wouldn't want to query 1 million rows if 100 rows would suffice, because that would cost the company a lot of money, depending on which company you work for, and it takes a long time to generate those 1 million results. So you might have to wait for a long time before getting your result. So you might as well just limit your rows. As you can see, we actually only have 14 rows here. So even if we limit it to 100, we only get 14 rows. So this is quite a small table. Let's try this one, orders, whatever this is. All right, rerun it. Aha. So it automatically caps to 100 rows. So I bet there are more rows than 100. So now I'm going to uncheck the limit 100 and I'm going to run it. Let's see what happens. As you can see, it says there's 6,912 rows. All right, so that's a lot more than 100. So as you can see, if I scroll all the way down, I get 100 rows, but this time we can also flip the pages. So if we go on the second page, you're going to have row 101 to 200, and you could keep going forward to see the next pages. So it's always good practice to limit your rows. That's why the SQL editor from Mode has this limit 100 check mark on, so that you don't query too much data. All right, let's run this again. As you can see, we get 100 rows, but we could limit to, for example, 14. We run it, and we will get 14 rows. All right, that's simple enough. Let's go back to our slides. So the where clause, the where filters the data with the specified conditions. So these conditions basically evaluates to a Boolean. So it is very similar to normal programming languages where you have like an if statement and then you have something that evaluates to a Boolean. Same thing in SQL, we can do that. And usually the where clauses are based on the columns. All right, let's look at an example. Going back to this one, I'm gonna remove the limit. And all right, let's look at the field real quick. Okay, So amount USD. So these are the columns: amount USD, quantity, occurred at, account ID, and ID. So what we can do is we can filter it by writing the where clause and then filtering on one of the columns. For example, I could do amount USD greater than, let's say, $1,000. As you can see here, there are orders that are below $1,000 and there are orders that are above $1,000. I want to get only the orders that are above $1,000, which is why I wrote amount USD is bigger than 1,000. All right, I click run. All right, as you can see, now I have 100 rows. All of these rows represent orders that are greater than $1,000. All right, now I'm curious. I'm gonna take off the limit 100 and I'm gonna run. I get back 5,642 rows. Okay, so that means I know there are 5,642 orders that are above $1,000. Now, what if I say the opposite? Smaller or equal to. I run. There are only 1,270 rows. So now we know that out of all the orders, there are 1,270 orders that are below $1,000 and the rest are above. There's actually a better way of doing that, and we will learn that in the future with aggregations. All right, now let's go back to our template query now. So just for a little preview, here it says conditions. In our example, we only used one condition, but there are actually a number of ways of using comparison and logical operator, which you'll learn in the future lessons. So for example, and or operators, but we'll talk about that later. Let's look at the order of the clauses. So remember last time where select always has to be before the where clause? Well, this is the new order. Select always comes before from, which always comes before where, which always comes before limit. So when you do select, you select the number of columns depending on which columns you want. From, you choose your table name. Where, you write your conditions. It could be multiple conditions. And then limit, you just give it a number. And then it will limit the number of rows. And technically, where and limit are optional. You can have a query without them, like we did in the last class where we only have select and from. Now that we know the order of clauses, the syntax of SQL, let's think about what it actually does. So here we have a diagram. Let's think about what each of these clauses do and visualize it with this drawing. So first you have a database that contains multiple tables. And then what happens is the from clause will determine the table to read, right? For example, in this diagram, it chooses this table, all right? So now instead of having 3 tables or all of the tables from this database, we are selecting one table, okay? So the table has been selected and here it is. And then we go to the next keyword, which is select, and select specifies columns. So it will only read the specified columns. So let's say it reads the first 3, and then now my data becomes smaller. As you can see, we only have 3 columns now. And then with these 3 columns, we have a where clause. And the where clause will restrict rows based on your condition. So let's just say that the where condition, all the rows must be yellow. I mean, obviously it's supposed to be a condition on the column, but let's just say it has filtered for all the yellow rows. And then now that it got filtered, now you have even less data. And then once again, I do another restriction, which is the limit clause, which restricts based on the number of rows. And then let's say that limit was limit 2. So now instead of 4 rows, I have 2 rows. And then finally, this is your final result of your query. All right, so that's pretty much the life of a data table, I guess. And these are all the clauses, and that's what the clauses do to your data. All right, so that's pretty much for where and limit, and I'll see you in the next one.